Well, Mike, your movie this week is called The Sword and the Dragon. We won't be watching it because we're on a date.
This time, we watch Season 6, Episode 17, The Sword and the Dragon.
In which Ilya Muromets decides to use one of those two things to kill the other one. But which will it be? Will the sword kill the dragon or the dragon kill the sword?
Oh my goodness, but first,
ho, 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 happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everyone.
I got to break out the special jingle jangle version of the theme song to put on the top of this one. And And in as much as it is the holidays, we have some special presents for you listeners, or at least we do if you're one of the kind people who've been giving to us all year round through Patreon, because we have some lovely little Patreon specials. First up, you might recall a few months ago, Charlotte was on a little podcast called Mug Up, where it's just a little behind the scenes casual chatting with the hosts of megaphonic shows. And Charlotte got to talk about hot dogs at length, and it was a lovely chat.
And art. We talked about art too. It was exciting.
Well, now it's my turn. I got to sit in the hot seat and talk about stuff. And if that's not enough, we're also doing another episode of the greatest podcast ever recorded. Last year, we looked at the colossal, star-studded biblical epic, The Greatest Story Ever Told. This year, we are looking at the 1970 musical Scrooge, starring Albert Finney and Alec Guinness as Marley.
Oh my goodness, Chris, have you watched it yet?
I have. We're recording our talk about it tomorrow, and it will have come out by the time this episode comes out, probably.
Oh, yes.
So this is all, the timeline is very weird right now, but yes, I have watched it, and it is going to be fun to talk about.
It's true. I mean, a musical version of Scrooge, I don't know. I didn't think that was gonna be as awesome as it was, but it was lots of fun. I enjoyed watching the Scrooge movie. Maybe even more the animated Luke Evans version. Ooh, he's so handsome even when he's animated.
I don't think it's as successful a movie as Muppet Christmas Carol as far as musical versions of Scrooge goes, but
few things are.
Yeah, exactly. But nevertheless, anyway, it's fun to talk about it. We talked about it with a bunch of our other friends here at Megaphonic, and it is available to anybody who just throws us a couple dollars. So there you go. Links in the show notes for all that.
This is always a super fun thing with verb tenses, because it's like we will have already talked about it. By the time, listener, you're listening to this, we have already talked about it, and perhaps you've even already heard the conversation. So, time is amazing.
Yeah.
What is time?
What is time?
Yeah.
Anywho, that is what we are offering to our listeners, in addition to another one of these very northern films, so to speak, that Mystery Science Theater has covered over the years, because they've only done so many Christmas specials, and while we have more Christmas specials yet to do, we're going to enjoy some of these Nordic movies and Russian movies before we move on to that.
Yeah, we get the snow. Right? We get everybody with big white beards. It's just like having Santa and reindeers and all those sorts of things. It's perfect.
It's perfect, says Charlotte about The Sword and the Dragon. Let's find out if she agrees with that in a few minutes when we actually talk about the film. This time we watched Season 6, Episode 17, The Sword and the Dragon. Once upon a time, there was a Russian knight named Invincior, who wasn't quite as invincible as his name suggests, because he was about to be defeated by the greatest enemy of humankind, time. Invincior gives his mighty sword to some passing travelers and lies down and becomes a mountain, because, oh yeah, this movie is all based on medieval Russian legends, and so stuff like that is bound to happen. The travelers eventually give the sword to Ilya Muromets, who should be a great warrior, but his legs don't work. Luckily, the travelers know just the cure for legs don't work syndrome, and now Ilya is right as rain, And he's got a big magic sword, too. And so, Ilya heads out to wander the land, righting wrongs, and all that good stuff. More specifically, he's off to defend the land he lives in from outside invaders called Tugars. They're basically Tatars or Mongols with the serial numbers rubbed off, so think Genghis Khan. See, the Tugars invaded Ilya's village a little while ago while his legs didn't work, and they absconded with the love of his life, so that's no good. The Tugars have also convinced a guy to act as a traitor and a spy, and to give the local ruler, Prince Vanda, bad advice. You know, real worm-tongue vibes off this guy. Anywho, Ilya Muromets has some adventures, including defeating a wind demon, becoming best bros with 2 other knights, and rescuing and impregnating the love of his life. Ilya pledges himself to Prince Vanda to help protect the land, but Wormtongue puts some bad ideas in the prince's head, and Ilya has to spend a few years in the prince's jail. Okay, meanwhile, the Tugars capture Ilya's wife again, and the leader of the Tugars, Colleen, raises Ilya Muromets' son as his own son. The kid's name is Little Falcon, which probably would have made elementary school difficult for him, but Colleen gets him a private tutor, and the kid grows up to be a great warrior. Okay, eventually things get real bad with the Tugars, and the prince has imprisoned or driven away all his best knights. Oh no, better get Ilya out of jail, except the worm-tongue traitor hasn't been feeding Ilya Muromets for all these years and years and years. Oh no. Well, good thing Ilya's wife made him a magic food-producing blanket or something. Anyway, that's the end of Wormtongue's influence on the prince. So, now that he's free, Ilya Muromets can come up with a series of elaborate plans to lure the Tugars and their leader, Colleen, right where he wants them. But first, he's forced to fight the best Tugar warrior in single combat. But wouldn't you know it, the best Tugar warrior happens to be Ilya's son, Little Falcon. Ilya recognizes the son that he's never seen before because he happens to be wearing a ring that used to be Ilya's. Long story, but it works. So, they have a sweet moment, and now Little Falcon is fighting side by side with his father. The battle escalates. At one point, Colleen tells his men to form a giant mountain of bodies so his horse can climb atop them and gain a better vantage point, which seems cruel to the people at the bottom of the pile. But, also turns out the Tugars have a 3-headed dragon? They probably could have done more with that 3-headed dragon. But eventually, Ilya Muromets and Little Falcon defeat the dragons and capture Colleen and send the rest of the Tugars packing, and Ilya gets to see his wife again and gives Invinsor's sword to his son, and everybody lives happily ever after, I guess. The end.
Meanwhile, on the Satellite of Love, Mike and Crow are awaiting the arrival of Tom, their dungeon master, as they finally go full nerd on the SOL. Mike chooses to be an elven king, while Crow is a dwarf prince. They encounter a Balrog who, of course, devours them. End of quest. Keeping our nerdy nerd theme going, Dr. F and Frank are organizing their vast comic book collections by placing these valuable relics of nerddom in plastic sleeves. Their indulgence is interrupted by the surprise visit from their new neighbors from Deep 12, Bridget and Mary Jo. The Mads are strangely affected by the presence of the female type in their lair, suddenly going all super weird and not being able to string sentences together. Dr. F even suggests that this drop-in meeting, it would be totally okay if it was a date. At a loss for how to entertain, despite many years of entertaining as a couple, they ask if the folks on the SOL have something prepared, and of course they do. It's a musical review of Politics, Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. But 1 minute of honk honk beep beep government gridlock, and the ladies are on the run. At movie break, the screen goes black and white as Mike silently introduces the sketch. Imagine if Bergman, Strindberg, and Ibsen got together to tell a Sven and Ole joke. This sketch is just as glorious as that sounds. It is perfection. The movie has a singing lady making a tablecloth for Ilya, so the sketch has GPC singing her way through a host of meals as Tom, Crow, and Mike slowly join in animal garb. Perhaps it's Tom's squirrel costume or Mike in bunny PJs a la Ralphie in A Christmas Story, but GPC declares the boys are just too weird and leaves. At the next movie break, the crew is visited by Ilya on the view screen. He's a waiter at the local pancake house and just as big and jovial as ever, though his heart is filled with sadness for having to take Cindy's shift. While he first balks at the impossibility, the crew convince Ilya that making the substitution of ham on the breakfast platter is his next epic quest. When the movie closes, it's time to check in on GPC's review of Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Mike gets all compliments, but GPC believes Tom is a shrill fishwife. Harsh, GPC. Harsh. Crow rounds out the cast. The Mads are so cool now that they have had a date and stuff. But really, let's get back to the comic book nerddom already, guys. You're not fooling anyone. What do you think, sirs? Oh my gosh. Before we sat down to record, before I even sat down to watch the episode, you had already watched it and you texted me saying, OMG, this one has the second best sketch ever in the entirety of MST3K. And as I was watching it, I was like, oh, it's certainly not this one with the ladies showing up because this is not the best ever. We've seen better. And then the, Bergman Sven and Ole joke came on and I'm like, oh my God, this is totally it. Absolutely. This has got to be what Chris is talking about. But then the next sketch came up with GPC singing about all the food with her little bouncing braids and everything. And I know how much you love GPC. And I was like, maybe Chris means this one. This is a really good sketch too.
It's pretty good. It's a pretty good episode, I have to say.
Yes, it was lots of fun. Although I do have to come down off of the this movie was awesome train because the movie itself, little too choppy haphazard for me. It felt like they were trying to put together too many myths into a story and it just didn't quite come together as a coherent whole for me.
Sure. Also this is not the original version of the film. It's been highly tampered with for the American audience, but it still makes a heck of an episode. I'm sure I must have shown you this one before if you hadn't seen it on your own.
No question, because I absolutely remembered the Sven and Ole joke.
Yeah, of course.
Absolutely. And I remembered GPC. Lutefisk. And then, I especially remembered Tom's squirrel costume and somehow did not remember the big pink bunny suit on Mike, even though he wears it into the theater when the sketch is done. I don't know how that didn't stick in my memory, but those cute little squirrel ears on Tom, totally in my memory banks. Oh, so funny. So cute.
Well, Mike just looks supernatural in the bunny suit. So.
It's true. Maybe that's what it is. He just looks like he belongs.
So this also has the D&D sketch at the beginning of the episode. And I think a little while ago, I was talking about how in the recent episodes since the reboot, there are clearly writers on staff who play D&D and know D&D. Mm-hmm. And seeing this is a big reminder that that's not true in the 90s.
No. And also to put this in context, they're referencing a whole bunch of stuff from Tolkien and Middle-earth. And this is also before the Peter Jackson movies. So the general public would not have had Mordor and Rivendell on the top of their minds when watching this as well, nor would they have distinguished that as something different and separate from Dungeons and Dragons. So this, in some ways, was all one big nerddom from the same source for a lot of people who didn't have more intimate knowledge of those two camps.
Yeah, although, two camps seems like a bit of a stretch. They're not unrelated in that way.
No.
But D&D very specifically isn't allowed to have the Tolkien stuff in it. They originally had hobbits in D&D, but then they got a cease and desist or lawsuit or whatever, and now they're called halflings.
Fair enough, I guess.
But they did try to borrow the Tolkien vibe. But yeah, no, this is definitely someone who knows about Tolkien on staff. Obviously, someone on staff knew about Tolkien.
Sure, yes.
But dropping that into D&D as it's like, let's play Tolkien. And that's not quite what D&D was even then. Though, that one joke where Mike refers to the Nads when they're calling as Mordor and Rivendell. And Tom just says under his breath, those are places.
Yeah.
And delivers that line so perfectly that Mike breaks. It's just such a great moment.
Especially because I felt a little admonished, I think, when I watched this with you, because at the time that I would have watched this with you, I'm not sure that I had read Lord of the Rings yet, and it had probably been a decade or so since I had read The Hobbit last. So I don't know, Mordor and Rivendell were places when I first watched this, and now I watch it and I'm like, ho, 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 that's right, Tom, you go. Take him down that notch.
Yeah, I hadn't read it at that point either, so I guess this is where I learned that was a place. I don't know.
Who can say?
One other thing that we should perhaps mention before we head into specific topics is that there are a lot of jokes about Finland here.
Yeah.
Because they had covered a movie by the same director that was a Russian-Finnish joint, The Day the Earth Froze, which was based on Finnish lore, so to speak, and blah, 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 was a Finnish-Russian joint, Finnish-Soviet joint. But this movie is not set in Finland, has nothing particularly to do with Finland. It's set in Kiev. And, that's different. So
yeah, this is the same director as the one who did Sinbad, which we watched last year, though, right?
The Magic Voyage of Sinbad, yes.
Because the sets look remarkably similar, especially the castle where the prince is.
Oh, it might be the same set. I'm not sure. It's the same. He's got a notable style. So
sure, certainly it's the same look. I will absolutely grant that. But you're right; it might have been a totally different set, but looks the same to me. So the main character of this movie is Ilya Muromets, and I know that there was an episode on a podcast that I like to listen to that did a story of Ilya Muromets, and I went to listen to it, and I was surprised that it only dealt with 5 minutes or something of this movie.
Oh, yeah, he did a lot more than this. So
yeah.
Ilya Muromets is from Russian medieval legends, and he's a bogatyr, which is like a knight errant, or I guess kind of like a samurai. I'm not sure. It may be closer to the medieval chivalric version of that. But somebody who goes out and has adventures and does good deeds and tries to make the world better in various ways. And so, there's a lot of different little adventures that he has, and we only get 2 or 3 of them in this movie. And I say only because this movie feels like it's chock full of random little plot details. But
it totally was.
But that's Legends for you.
Yeah, that's true, especially when you have an enormous character like this. One of the things that surprised me was the Myths and Legends podcast, which I listened to, said that Ilya Muromets is the only epic hero that's been canonized into the Russian Orthodox Church.
Oh.
I know.
That's interesting.
Isn't it, though? It seems very interesting for a church to take on an epic hero like this.
Yeah. There are 2 other bogatyrs.
Those must be his bro friends.
His bro friends, yeah, exactly. Let's see here. Dobrinya Nikitich and Alosha Popovich. Dobrin is the one who gets the feast thrown for him when he gets back at the beginning of the movie, and Alosha is the one who is sassy to him when he first meets him.
Oh, the one who plays swords with the milkmaids?
I think it's jousts in the original.
You're right. Yes.
Okay, here's the whole thing. So there's this weird moment when Alosha's like, you are a poor person, you don't belong here at the Knights, and they have a little bit of a row. And Ilya says something like what you just said, you just joust with milkmaids behind the stable. Mm-hmm. And whenever I was watching that, I always took that to mean all you're good for is making out. Sort of how some of the other nobles at court are described later as being they're there for drinking, but they're not there for fighting.
You're telling me that that's not what that's referencing?
No.
Oh.
Because I watched the original version of it with different subtitles.
In which they had a cutaway scene where he was really jousting with milkmaids?
No, but it provides a different translation, which is clearer. It is, you're only good for fighting with girls.
Oh, they have clearly not met Xena, Princess Warrior.
Well, yeah, obviously.
Or Eowyn, or... No, sorry.
But that changed my interpretation of it. So when Tom immediately retorts in his voice, I'm not gay, which seems like a weird thing to say if the movie is saying all you do is sleep with women.
That did land weird, yeah.
I mean, it lands weird no matter what. But even if it's all you do is fight girls, then I guess that makes a little bit more sense. So maybe they understood it better than I did. But I don't know. It's not a great moment.
No.
But whatever. It's fast. It's fine. It's whatever. There is also a folk villain from this tradition of legends that also kind of appears in the movie because the Tugars are named after Tugarin, who's like a folk villain that the two bros who aren't Ilya fought against at various points. So apparently that's where that comes from.
Okay.
But obviously, it's very hard for, at least for me, to look at this and not read them as being Mongols or something similar to that.
Certainly they're going for that look in the way that they cast those parts.
Well, especially the lesser parts, because the leader, Kalin, does not look as stereotypically from Mongolia as the people under him often do.
But he looks very different from all of the Scandinavian/Russian main characters who are the quote-unquote good guys.
Yeah, no, this movie has a bit of it's doing some political work, let's just say, or it certainly has been read as doing some political work, because in addition to that kind of othering of the Tugars, despite changing the name of them, it still feels like they're playing with tropes that are very recognizable.
I would say so, yeah.
You've also got this story being told in the 1950s about Kievan Rus, the medieval country, let's say, that Russia and Ukraine and a few other places understand as their origin story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it's like you can read it as being part of a tale of how Kiev and Ukraine are the natural homes of Russia, which obviously then has other political things. Yeah.
Yeah, especially now. Wow.
So especially now, but also in the 1950s.
That's true.
Yeah. Like in both times, it has felt like there's a bit of a political message behind it.
I think one of the things that the Myths and Legends podcast opened with was none of the political boundaries that we know today were in place in any way when the legend was taking place. Because he was saying the legend is from something like, the year 1000. Is that about right, Chris?
I think it's a little bit later than that, but that's close enough for medieval times.
Yeah. So nothing that we understand in terms of political boundaries would have been in place then, not in the way that they are now.
Well, yes. And also the Rus, the people who were ruling that area, were Varangians, which is to say Norsemen coming from the north.
Oh.
So maybe there is actually a bit more Scandinavian in this after all.
Are you talking yourself into this being a Finnish film?
Well, Finnish is slightly different, but yeah,
True.
I don't know. No, it's not from Finland. They're not from that area, as I understand it. I'm not an expert on any of this, really, but
no, nor am I.
It is interesting to think about. I watched the original version of the movie, which got a restoration a few years ago, and there's a very fancy DVD or Blu-ray of it that a company called Deaf Crocodile put out. We'll put a link in the show notes if you want that. It comes with lots of bonus stuff. That's not how I watched it. I just bought the streamable version because I don't need more physical media in my life.
Fair enough.
But it turns out, I learned later that Mosfilm, the Russian film company that was the Soviet film company that funded a lot of this, also is hosting the restored version on their YouTube channel with the same English subtitles. So I guess you could watch that as well.
Oh, well, there you go. After you bought it, you found out it was on YouTube, huh?
I did. Well, it's okay. I don't mind throwing them a bit of money. They do some interesting work.
Oh, that's true. And honestly, I'm sure the print that you saw was probably like more colorful and more beautiful than the one that made it to MST3K.
Oh, yeah. No. The original movie is much better. It is not a bad movie at all. So in addition to being significantly more beautiful when it is the correct colors and when it is the correct aspect ratio, because this is one of the first Soviet widescreen films, if not the first.
Wow.
It also, if you don't have the terrible dubbing job that a lot of the people did, it is a much more compelling acting performances and so forth.
Oh, I believe it. Yeah.
If you at all like these movies, I strongly recommend watching the originals. I'm not saying they're brilliant. I'm not saying I fell in love with them, but they're very pretty and interesting to watch. If you've ever been curious about seeing Ilya Muromets or Sampo or Sadko in the original version, do it. You won't be sorry.
One of the things that I found interesting about the myth that I listened to, it focused only on the wind demon part of this story.
Who's not a wind demon. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a wind demon at all. Inside of the myth, it's called a nightingale.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a half man, half bird who is terrorizing a forest. And so all of these people who need to travel between two places have to go all the way around the forest because there are all these dangers inside, including a couple of Baba Yagas, which is always fabulous, right? You gotta love the woman who lives in a house on chicken feet and rides around on a mortar and pestle. I mean, that's just phenomenal. Like, no notes. She's amazing. All of the versions of her.
She's absolutely great. Absolutely great.
But in the legend that they were talking about, he defeats the nightingale, brings it to the prince, and the prince puts the nightingale in jail because the nightingale's murdered like so many people, merchants who have tried to go through the forest. But the nightingale escapes, and Ilya goes after the nightingale and kills the nightingale, right? Like kills the nightingale, thrusts the sword through the back of the nightingale. And there's all these people on the edge of the forest who are there looking scared and weeping. And he's like, no, you don't need to be scared anymore. I killed the guy. And like, then he realizes, oh no, you're crying because this is your guy. Like, this is your father, your grandfather, your husband, right? Like this, you are his family. And so he has this moment of, oh my gosh, like this nightingale that I killed, which was terrorizing the prince of the land and stuff, has a family and a home of his own. And the way the myth was framed inside of that telling was really compelling in terms of having that, realizing that who you perceive as your enemy is not a single being and not a completely evil being. I don't know, it was really interesting. And a different spin on, the first 20 minutes of this movie. So I thought that was an interesting difference with the wind demon.
That is really interesting. I've got two other differences in the original version of the film that I kind of want to bring up real quick.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is getting back to a topic we've been discussing a few times here. How old do you think Little Falcon is?
Okay, the actor or the character?
The character.
Okay. I think the character is like 16 or 17.
Right. So no, you're not right.
Oh, boo!
So according to the subtitles in the official version, if I'm understanding it correctly, he is 10 years old.
I'm sorry, no.
He is 10 years old, but as strong as a 20-year-old.
All right. You're right. I didn't adjust for him being the son of an epic mythical warrior.
Yeah, and his father was only sent to jail for 12 years and gets pulled out early.
No, it's true.
So he can't be that old. Also, he's called Little Falcon because Ilya's wife calls him Falcon all the time beforehand. So that doesn't come out of nowhere like it does in this version.
It does feel a little weird. Although, like, Ilya in the movie is the one who's like, if you should have a son, I want a son. And if you should just happen to have a son, I think you should call him Little Falcon.
Yeah.
I can't believe that the bad guy who was raising the son of his enemy didn't change his name.
Yeah.
That just seems like, villain rule number 1, don't use the given name of your enemy's child when you're raising them. Give them a new name. Take away their jewelry.
I mean, I'm impressed that the ring that was put on his finger when he was 2 stayed on until he was adult-sized, if not actually adult.
Mythic epic warrior. I mean, what can you do?
Here's another thing, and it is something that I think is really specifically interesting about how you Americanize a film in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
So you remember the scene, Little Falcon gets to go into the jail where his mother is being held, and doesn't get to, sort of sneaks his way in.
Uh-huh. Which looks like Helm's Deep or something like that, the mountain behind Helm's Deep.
Yeah,
Weird.
yeah, basically. And he's wandering around looking for his mother. And do you remember how he's going to recognize the mother?
Oh, yeah, because she has like a big old scar on her face, right?
That is what it is in the American version.
Oh, no. What is it in the real original?
In the original version, assuming that I can trust these subtitles, she's got a mole on her cheek. And because it's widescreen, you can see both of them at the same time. And when he says a mole on her cheek, you can see her hiding her cheek. And she's missing her little toe on one of her feet. And then you see her hiding her foot. In the American version, with the pan and scan, you just see him saying all of this. And then you cut to her and she's all crouched over hiding herself.
Well, and she's clearly hiding her face. So I did have the sense that she was trying to cover the scar to knowing that that was a distinguishing mark.
Right. But yeah, the fact that there's also a missing toe.
Huh.
It seems like for an American audience, the thinking was that how can you have the wife of the hero have a missing toe?
Huh.
Whereas in the Russian version, either that's so much a part of the myth that that's already part of the culture and it's like fine, or it's just fine. Like, yeah, some people are missing a toe.
Yeah, well, it's a cold place and frostbite happens.
There you go.
What are you going to do? It's medieval times. People are missing toes. It's not a big deal.
Hey, everybody, it's time for the Shallow 13.
It's time for the Shallow 13. 13 legendary tales all about today's experiment, the sword and the dragon. Go, Charlotte, go!
Let's start with some familiar faces, except we don't actually see any of the faces, but we certainly recognize the director's name. Alexander Ptushko was also the guy who brought us Sadko and Sampo, which were hacked to pieces, badly dubbed, released to the US, and then shown on MST3K as The Magic Voyage of Sinbad and The Day the Earth Froze, respectively.
Ptushko first gained fame with the 1935 film The New Gulliver, a retelling of Gulliver's travels, or at least the first bit when he's in Lilliput, and all the little Lilliputians in the movie are done with stop animation. It's not the first film to mix live action and stop animation. It comes after The Lost World and King Kong, but it has way more stop animation than King Kong, and it looks kind of amazing. Link in the show notes if you want to check it out, but, feel free to skip ahead to the good bits.
At one point, the Tugar leader Kalin is speaking, and Crow interrupts.
I'll destroy the infidels who dare defy me.
It's Boris Badenov.
And I'm not sure whether Crow knew this or not, but yeah, that is Boris Badenov. Or it's his voice actor, Paul Frees. Frees did a ton of voice work, working for Disney, Rankin Bass, and of course, Jay Ward of Rocky and Bullwinkle fame.
He was also the guy you turned to if you wanted an impression of Orson Welles. He was the Maurice LaMarche of his era, if you will. And for those of you who've forgotten, Maurice LaMarche is the guy who voices the Brain in Pinky and the Brain. That guy. In fact, Toucan Sam, the mascot for Fruit Loops, was originally voiced by Mel Blanc, then by Paul Frees, and then Maurice LaMarche, which is a stupid amount of talent that bird has squandered.
Frees, or his voice, appeared in a few other misted movies, like The Magic Sword, Tormented, and Beginning of the End. But most notably, he wrote and directed The Beatniks. Hey, isn't that the other episode with the General Hospital short? I wonder if we're going to do that one soon.
We get another one of these moments when Tom interrupts the narrator.
Brave and fearless men rose up to perform mighty deeds against the forces of evil.
I'm Mike Wallace.
Mightiest of all was Invincior.
Because, yes, that is Mike Wallace providing the narration. Mike Wallace is best remembered as the lead reporter on 60 Minutes, but he got his start as a radio announcer for programs like The Spike Jones Show, as well as being the host of shows like Biography. Yeah, the same Biography that would later be revived with Jack Perkins as the host.
The guy who dubs Ilya Muromets, Marvin Miller, also did a lot of voiceover work, most notably as the voice of Robbie the Robot from the film Forbidden Planet. He's the narrator on a bunch of other Misted movies and shorts, including Season 2's King Dinosaur, Season 8's The Deadly Mantis, and Season 13 short Pipeline to the Clouds, and a bunch more. He was good at his job, and it seems affordable, so he did a lot of work.
Okay, on to the episode. During the D&D game, Tom has Mike and Crow pick characters from what he calls the Middle-earth Christomathy.
Have you selected your characters?
No, I didn't know that there was supposed to do...
Silence! Pick a character from this, the Middle-earth Christomathy.
A Christomathy is it's like if you gathered up a bunch of short texts from various sources and put them together in one collection so that others can study it. It's like a didactic anthology. Anyway, to the best of my knowledge, there is no such thing as a Middle-earth Christomathy.
A passing stranger offers an elixir to Ilya Muromets, and Mike has a suggestion.
Drink the dew of the magic grass, Ilya, and perhaps thy strength will return.
Here's some Haley's M.O.
Thank you, Mike.
Haley's M.O. advertised itself as a combination laxative antacid lubricant. Whee! And consisted of milk of magnesia mixed with mineral oil. According to a 70s commercial we'll link in the show notes, the medicine could help you hang out with your friends at a needlepoint class despite your occasional irregularity.
Not long after, Ilya stands up and Tom says,
That was one high colonic. Yes, sir, I feel like a new man.
A high colonic is another term for a colonic irrigation, a kind of supercharged enema that is promoted as a form of alternative medicine, as a way of purging toxins that allegedly linger in your intestines. Despite the procedure being potentially dangerous and having absolutely no proven medical benefits, it had a weird surge in popularity during the 90s.
Halfway through the movie, we get this exchange.
This legend could have used some punching up.
Legend of Boggy Creek had more depth.
You know where this is going, right? The Legend of Boggy Creek is a 1972 horror film that inspired two unauthorized sequels. Return to Boggy Creek, which didn't get the MST3K treatment, and Boggy Creek 2, and the legend continues, which was riffed in Season 10. We'll get to it.
When Ilya Muromets reveals to Little Falcon that he's his father, Crow quips,
What you say is not true. I am your father.
Oh, great. My dad's Burl Ives.
Burl Ives, the singer and actor, is most familiar from his voice role as Sam the Snowman in the Rankin Bass Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer Christmas special, which, sadly, does not feature Paul Frees. They did both appear in the badly animated special, The First Easter Rabbit, but, that's nothing. That is absolutely nothing.
And finally, as we leave the theater, Tom sings,
So long, country bumpkin, fresh as frost out on the pumpkin. I'll see some sights, but
Country Bumpkin is a 1974 country hit by Cal Smith. Over the song's 3 verses, a man meets his future wife in a bar. They have a son, and then 40 years later, she dies saying, "So long, Country Bumpkin." It's a perfect example of a particular type of sentimental country ballad. Link in the show notes.
And that's time. All right, let's talk about that sketch. Let's talk about that sketch.
Yay! Well, then we have to start getting really serious, Chris.
Yeah, kind of. All right, we're given this short film in black and white that is directed by Ingmar Bergman, based on a script by August Strindberg, based on an idea by Henryk Ibsen. Mm-hmm. And it's a Sven and Ole joke. Yep. So, where shall we begin? Well, What do you know about our three creatives in this, Ibsen, Strindberg, and Bergman?
Ooh, so the most that I know about Bergman is at one point in time in my life, I've seen The Seventh Seal, probably more than once, but it would have been a long time ago. And I remember from The Seventh Seal that death is, in like big black robes with the white face, and that people have to play him chess when they die if they want to challenge death in some sort of way.
Do you remember who plays him in chess in the movie?
I don't at all remember who plays him in chess. It's not me.
It's Max von Sydow, a.k.a. Jesus from The Greatest Picture Ever Told.
Jesus is death? Is that what you're telling me?
No, I'm telling you Jesus is fighting death at chess.
I am so overwhelmed by Jesus and death being in some sort of epic battle of chess. It's pretty awesome. But mostly when I think of that scene, I don't actually think of The Seventh Seal anymore. I think of Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, where they end up playing games with death in order to be able to go back and set things right. But they don't play chess.
So I've seen The Seventh Seal, I think. I mean, I know I have. I know I've sat down to watch it. I don't know if I finished it. I don't know if I made it through. I remember finding it quite boring, if pretty. But,
sure. Yep.
And like, that's an iconic scene. I've seen that scene, both like clips of it and references to it. And it's like, great. It's iconic, of course. But
yes.
I don't know. The film just kind of bounced off me, and I've always meant to like check out more of him. He had a tremendous body of work. He lived a long time. He kept making films. Many of them are highly acclaimed films of various different kinds. Everybody loves them, it seems. I just didn't really get along with this one, which is the most famous one, which, reading up a little bit for today's recording, nobody recommends you watch The Seventh Seal first.
Fair enough. But it's definitely a movie that, like, if you are a film student, it's going to be part of the canon of what you must watch as a film student.
Yeah.
So it's not something that you can ignore. You can't ignore him as an auteur. Like, Bergman has to be a part of your conscious understanding of what film is and what film can be, etc.
Exactly. It's high in the canon, although I feel like people talk more about his other film Persona now, but I don't know. I haven't seen that one either. So
I don't know Persona.
It's a film about a nurse and a patient, and psychologically they sort of meld into one another. And so it's a bit of a psychological horror about identity and things like that. Like, It's apparently very interesting, and the acting is incredible. So
okay.
I don't know. I haven't seen it. I should watch it. Maybe I will. Maybe that'll be my holiday treat to myself.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to have a really sparse film, which, like, I think that's a distinguishing feature of Bergman film, and what they're making fun of in this sketch, right, is just how sparse everything is and how there's lots of silence. You really do have to have phenomenal actors putting that together, right? Good direction, phenomenal actors who can make that work.
Yeah, and really good lighting. I mean, the thing that I think of when I think of Bergman, with my very limited knowledge of him, is that, like, black and white films with incredibly dark blacks and incredibly subtle uses of gray and lots of chiaroscuro and so forth. In preparation for this, I watched a little bit of a film Bergman made for TV of an August Strindberg play.
Oh, combining two of the three?
Yes. So August Strindberg is a playwright who lived from 1849 to 1912. Sure. And he started out as kind of a realist, but then he had a difficult time in his life in many ways, and struggled with all sorts of mental illnesses. And later in his career, he had kind of a big break and started really exploring the unconscious. And a dream play sort of starts out with like a little written manifesto on title cards about how it's like a character study, but we're not going to pay any attention to realism. The set is not in one particular place all the time, and people double up and characters change, and it's all very concept-y and ethereal and slow-paced and dramatic and starkly lit and so forth. And like, I watched about 20 minutes of it. It seems good if you're into that thing. It's influential. Like, Strindberg is a big deal for that sort of thing. He seems to have been a terrible, difficult person, but
yeah. I guess.
But a really interesting writer and somebody worth grappling with, I guess.
I have to say the most I know about Strindberg, I learned from the web comic Strindberg and Helium, which is like a decade old now.
I had forgotten all about Strindberg and Helium until you mentioned it as we were getting into this. And what a lovely web series that was at the time. I haven't seen it in a long time. Did you go back and rewatch it?
I went back and I rewatched a couple of them because they're so funny and they're so clever and they're lots of fun. And you have this he almost looks like they're being fashioned after Edgar Allan Poe or something, right? Like he's very dark, and the person who plays him has this extremely deep voice, and he just, then you have Helium right next to him who's like, Helium! And, Strindberg will be like, blah, 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 death. And then Helium's like, death!
Helium's like a little pink balloon ghost creature who's just adorable. And it's true. Obviously that's the humor is rubbing up against Strindberg's dark, goth, troubled persona. Yes. Who, by the way, he does look like Poe in his later years, certainly. That's
good.
That's just what he looks like. But if you don't know Strindberg, Poe is a very easy thing to grab onto when you're looking at that.
Totally. And they have him thinking about alchemy, and he's talking about death. And he talks about, in one of the episodes, the one where he sees two chemical symbols and he's going to turn them into gold using alchemy. And he labors over this for hours. And he says, my hands were black and bleeding, black as is my need, bleeding as is my heart. It's just oh my God, man.
I mean, actual Strindberg was into all that stuff, so.
Yeah. And then, of course, you have Helium, who comes in and is just here's a cupcake for you. For you.
Oh, that's right. That's where I got for you from. Uh-huh. Well, do you know who couldn't stand August Strindberg?
No. Who couldn't stand August Strindberg?
Henryk Ibsen.
What?
Henryk Ibsen, who was only about, 20 years older than him, and did not care for the man. And the feeling was apparently very much mutual.
Oh my gosh. But this short that we have on MST3K would suggest that there's so much that lines up with them for the darkness of their thoughts, for this exploration of the psyche, for the psychological battles that people have to play. Because in Ibsen's A Dollhouse, there's so much going on with the female lead inside of that trying to, create a life for herself and figure out where she fits in a family, right?
Yeah, Ibsen had sort of started out writing a few very fantastical plays. He wrote Peer Gynt, where, In the Hall the Mountain King comes from and all that stuff. I mean, that's a Grieg piece that was made for the play. But yeah, and then he sort of took a turn at some point towards realism and did A Doll's House and some other things like that. A Doll's House is basically the story of a woman whose life is a lie. She's a nice bourgeois woman with a husband and kids, and it turns out that their marriage has been a sham, and it all falls apart, and then it unfalls apart because of a deus ex machina, and the husband is actually, even though I just, called you a useless person and said you've ruined us, now that everything's fine, we can go back to living our little perfect bourgeois life. And she's actually, no, and leaves with the kids.
Actually, no.
Right? And so this is a kind of shocking type of realism. Mm-hmm. But Ibsen was also really interested in what's called the well-made play, which is to say, everything is very tightly made. It's a well-made play. It's what it sounds like. But he was subverting it, because typically a well-made play would sort of end with happy ending, or everything, the norm, your expectations are yes, satisfied. And so Strindberg didn't care for him being so conventional in that sense. But actually, my understanding is that they kind of respected each other's work. And certainly they're both seen as big people in the Scandinavian literary scenes, let's say.
It's really hard to imagine any of these three men ever telling something like a Sven and Ole joke.
Well, okay, let's talk about Sven and Ole jokes for a bit. Did you grow up with them?
I didn't. Well, okay, sort of. because one of the things that we listened to on public radio when I was growing up was A Prairie Home Companion.
Yes.
And Garrison Keillor totally told a lot of Sven and Ole jokes, or along those lines, jokes about, Norwegian bachelor farmers inside of Minnesota and things like that.
Yeah, or not even bachelor, because Ole is traditionally married to Lena.
That's
and
true.
So there's lots of Ole and Lena jokes as well. The same kind of joke.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Yes.
We'll have a link in the show notes to one of the segments of Ole and Lena, Sven and Ole jokes. It's an interesting thing to listen to because Garrison Keillor describes them as Polish jokes, but about Norwegians.
Oh.
Which is an alarming way of framing it.
Yeah, it is.
Because Sven and Ole jokes come from immigrant Norwegian and Swedish communities in the Midwest. That is something that doesn't come from Norway or Sweden. They wouldn't tell those jokes there. It is specifically about and from immigrants. Polish jokes are not from Polish people. Although, occasionally some Polish people may have made them sometimes.
Sure.
I have Polish relatives in my family, and there were Polish jokes told around that. But for the most part, Polish jokes were from other people making fun of Polish people.
It seems like it's still trying to push on a stereotype of a recent immigrant or of a person who refuses to assimilate into some sort of quote-unquote American culture. I don't know. I asked my friends who live in Minnesota if they had a favorite Sven and Ole joke, and their first response was, these jokes in no way represent the community, and we don't tell these jokes, and we don't tell these jokes on purpose because they are not at all representative of the people who are here in Minnesota. And I don't know if Mike and crew would agree with that on MST3K back in the 90s, but certainly, we're 20 to 30 years after that now, and a different generation of people is engaging with these particular jokes.
And a generation of people who are much more distant from the original source material, right? From the specific culture that invented and popularized these jokes. Mike and the crew are, most of them anyways, coming from a culture where this is something that they encountered their whole lives, and it was coming from a relatively positive place within the community, right? This was kind of a celebration of their culture, even if they're making fun of silly people. These jokes are not really saying all Norwegian immigrants are like this. Just, we all know that guy is kind of the vibe of these jokes. And therefore at that time, especially when it's the same people making those jokes, it is more okay and celebratory, it seemed. And then you get the children of those and the children of them and the children of them until finally everybody wakes up and it's like, wait
a second.
This is just us making fun of immigrants.
Yeah, it's true. But to take that joke that is making fun of that highly accented person and then use the tools of a Bergman, Strindberg, and an Ibsen to make it high art. Oh, it was a really nice juxtaposition.
Yeah.
That was really fun.
Well, so let me ask you about the other thing. And I'm not part of this community. I've never lived there. I don't have any Scandinavian heritage in me that I know of. So, what do I have to say? But one of the other depictions of something that is not too far off from a Sven and Ole routine is the character of Rose Nyland from The Golden Girls. Who is constantly telling stories about the idiot but good-hearted Scandinavian people from St. Olaf, Minnesota, and is herself a depiction of one of those things.
Sure.
And it feels like it's partaking in some of the same things that these Sven and Ole jokes are. I mean, certainly some of the formats are the same, where there's
yes,
a foolish person who makes a big misunderstanding about either language or cultural norms or whatever.
I think one of the things that you have to be assuming at that point in time is, when we watch The Golden Girls, we love Rose. And that means that the Sven and Ole jokes have to be coming from a place of love as well.
Which I think they were originally.
Which, as opposed to the Polish jokes that were told inside of the 70s that were not coming from a place of love, right?
Yeah.
They were coming from a place of mockery and disdain.
Exactly.
And it's different when the jokes come from a place of love And I think that's the point you're making when you're saying it's coming from within the community. And at the time, it would have been from a place of love. But as you become further removed from it, you don't have that rooting in the same place, in the same location, as you move farther and farther away in time and understanding, I suppose.
Yeah.
I wonder if Rose, for people who, like my kid, who was only born in the last, couple of decades, if watching Rose has the same impact it would have in the 80s.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, she is still big-hearted and foolish, and that's a very funny combination.
It's true.
And if it can be made into a specific person rather than a whole community or culture of people, then that's successful. But when your only contact with Scandinavian immigrants are Sven and Ole jokes or things like that, then that's when it starts to feel a bit ugly, I think. That's my sense of it. Again, I'm not part of this culture, and I'm super happy to hear from people who are about what they think about it, because I find it kind of interesting.
My grandfather was 100% Norwegian. He was one of the first 2 people in his family to be born in the United States. All of his older brothers and sisters were born in Norway before they moved here. And they moved to the Dakotas, and then he eventually moved to the Bay Area. And I never talked to him about Sven and Ole jokes. I wonder if he heard them, and I wonder if he thought they were funny. I wish he was still around so that I could ask.
I mean, I wish he was still around so that you could show him the sketch and see what he thinks about it. Which, just to be super clear, I am in no way trying to cancel or even suggest that this sketch is problematic. I don't think anything about this sketch seems problematic, although if there's an argument for that, I'm willing to hear it. This seems like it's totally coming from a good place. Just some of the ways these jokes get played out later. I've seen more and more people feeling very uncomfortable about them online as I was looking up how people thought about them these days. And
that
I
seems
think
fair.
That is all perfectly reasonable. Yeah.
Sure. Question. So the punchline is, sorry for the spoiler.
Oh, yes.
The punchline is when you're out of
slits,
you're out of beer.
Yes, because the beer Schlitz.
Okay, so it is a beer Schlitz joke.
Yeah, when you're out of Schlitz, you're out of beer was the slogan of Schlitz beer for a while.
I was like, this doesn't make sense as a joke unless they're talking about beer. And I do know there's a beer called Schlitz, but it's just not a very good beer. And now that I live in the Pacific Northwest, you're never out of beer. It doesn't matter how much Schlitz you have. If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you've ever been on the bottom of a mountain of people, or if you'd like to ask us anything, get in touch with us. Our email is info@itsjustashow.com, and we'd love to hear from you. This show is made possible by listeners like you, and like our randomly selected supporter, Matthew. Thank you, Matthew. For as little as $1 an episode, you can be like Matthew and help us research and record this show. You can join us in a friendly Discord, and you can listen to all our superfan bonus bits. Find out more at itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And if you want to follow up on anything that was mentioned today, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/145. Well, Chris, we've completed the epic quest of 2023. What's up next for us here at It's Just a Show?
Well, next up, it's a little celebration we like to call Gamuary.
Gamera, a friend to the children, a friend to all children.
Yes, except we've done all the Gamera episodes finally, and so we are out of Gamera movies, and we're going to have to watch one of them knockoff Gameras. So next time, we will be looking at Season 2, Episode 12, Godzilla vs. Megalon.
That sounds like lots of fun. Well, we'll have to go to the theaters and watch New Godzilla. What is that, Godzilla -1?
Godzilla minus Garfield.
That is an epic battle if I have ever heard it. Who will eat the lasagna? Who will mock Odie most effectively?
We'll find out soon enough. But until then...
Maria Von Trapp's face off against the Mongol horde. The hills are alive, the hills are alive, the hills are alive.
August Strindberg's Backdraft. Take it away, Theme Squad. Ah,